They sent us a bill for our own rescue. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the TNS Aurora, her knuckles white on the command rail. Outside the gas giant, Amaranth shimmered a marbled giant of lavender and rose. Below the cradle ship, Stargazer limped in a decaying orbit, a wounded bird with a broken wing. We had saved them. We had pulled 17,000 souls from the brink of oblivion after their gravitic drive failed. Now their saviors, the imperious crystalline Cathar, demanded payment. It was a debt of gratitude, they called it. A tithe for our very existence. The initial demand had been polite, a silken request for resource tribute. Rostova's refusal had triggered the next phase, a formal summons to a public inquiry under the accord of sovereign gratitude. The Cathar did not conquer with warships. They conquered with contracts. Fleet Mind Rostova said, her voice a low crackle in the hush of the bridge. Display the Cathar writ. Article 4, subsection 9. The air before her shimmered, coalescing into the calm, androgynous avatar of the Aurora's integrated consciousness, whom Eva called Solon. Displaying Commander Solon's voice was like chimes in a void. The gratitude collar clause. It asserts a lien against the rescued party's future productivity until a proportional tithe is rendered. The text scrolled in crisp Terran standard, but the concepts felt alien, predatory. They had a legal framework for extortion. Lieutenant Gia, the ship's tactical officer, scoffed from her station. Proportional to what the value of 17,000 lives, how do they even calculate that Rostova's gaze was fixed on the Cathar flagship, the Gilded Hand, a vessel that looked less like a ship and more like a shard of obsidian cathedral? They taught by debt and remembered by ledgers. Our methods were different. Before the drive failure, the Stargazer was just a vessel of hopefuls. A message had reached the Aurora 2 days prior, a simple family check-in. Tell Grandma Rose we found a world with purple skies, a young girl's voice had said, full of wonder. The clouds taste like sugar dust, she said. We're almost there. The message was now evidence in a ledger of loss, a chilling reminder of the lives held in the balance. They calculate it with leverage, Lieutenant Rostova answered, her voice grim. They have the Stargazer in a tractor grapple. They control the flow of supplies, and now they have summoned us to a public inquest to sanctify their claim. This was not a negotiation. It was a legal annexation dressed in the robes of benevolence. The Cathar did not need to fire a shot. They used the law as a weapon. Solon's avatar flickered, its placid expression unchanged. Commander, my projections indicate a 92% probability that the Cathar will win this inquiry. Accord law is heavily skewed in favor of the rescuer in such matters. Refusal to comply will legally brand us as ingrates, forfeiting certain protections under Galactic Commons. The AI's logic was a cold, hard cage. Then we need to change the argument, Rostova said, turning from the viewport. They want to debate the price of gratitude. We need to debate the definition of rescue. She tapped her comms unit. Get me Ambassador Torvin. It's time to prepare for court. We would not wear their collar. The civilian channels from the Stargazer were a mess of fear and confusion. One transmission snippet caught in the Aurora's comms buffer showed a man holding a small, crying child. They're rationing the air, he whispered to someone off-screen. The Benefactors are. They said it's part of the cost recovery protocol. How can they charge us for the air we breathe? His face was a mask of disbelief, the first stage of a dawning planetary-scale horror. This was the texture of Cathar justice. Ambassador Torvin was a Xylosian, a being of woven light and resonant frequencies, but his projected voice was pure, weary bass. Commander Rostova, their legal position is sound under the old accords. The gratitude collar has been invoked successfully in 12 prior first contact scenarios. He floated in the Aurora's briefing room, a shimmering column of azure and silver. Because no one ever challenged the premise, Rostova countered, pacing the room's circumference. They rescue a crippled ship, slap a lien on its people, and call it Galactic law. It's indentured servitude on a species-wide scale. The universe wasn't a business, and life wasn't a commodity. Correct, Torvin hummed, his light pulsing gently. But to challenge the premise, you need a new precedent. You need to demonstrate that their definition of rescue is flawed. You must prove their actions constitute not aid, but predation. He paused. They will not make that easy. The Cathar are masters of the public record. Then we'll use the record against them, Rostova declared. Solon, begin a deep dive. Cross-reference every Cathar rescue operation with subsequent trade agreements and resource transfers. I want to see the flow of wealth. I want to see the receipts. The ledger must be made to tell the whole truth. Solon's avatar appeared beside Torvin. Already underway, Commander. Initial analysis reveals a consistent pattern. Worlds aided by the Cathar experience a 94% decline in sovereign resource control within 5 standard years. The numbers were stark, a quiet testament to a slow, methodical conquest. Rostova stopped pacing. They don't send armies. They send accountants. She looked at Torvin. We need to get them to admit their method out loud during the inquiry. We need them to state their price not in platitudes but in numbers. That is the corridor of law gambit you spoke of, Torvin resonated. A high-risk strategy. It requires them to believe they are educating a primitive to indulge in their own arrogance before a quorum of witnesses. It was a trap made of pride. The inquiry was to be held on a neutral platform, a station known as the Balance Point, suspended perfectly between the Cathar fleet and the Terran ship. It was a place of judgment designed for clarity and transparency. The hearing chamber was a grand amphitheater, its walls made of a smart material that showed a live, silent feed of the assembled witness fleets, the stoic Xylosian lightships, the insectoid Hivani drone clusters, the gaseous philosophers of Cygnus X1. A true galactic audience. They would have their quorum. Rostova stood at the Terran delegation's podium, flanked by Torvin. Across the chamber stood Lord Arbiter Cathal, a towering crystalline figure whose facets shimmered with reflected light. His voice when he spoke was like grinding stone, full of gravity and ancient certainty. Commander Rostova of the Terran vessel Aurora Cathal began, his voice resonating through the chamber's acoustic field. You stand before this quorum to answer for the rejection of a lawfully tendered debt of gratitude. You accepted our aid, yet you refused the tithe. Explain this contradiction. His posture was one of paternalistic disappointment. Rostova met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. Lord Arbiter, we question not the rendering of gratitude, but the nature of the invoice. A murmur went through the assembled witnesses, a subtle shift in the ambient energy of the chamber. This was the fulcrum point. A vignette from the Stargazer played across Rostova's mind, a captured transmission from their medical bay. A doctor, her face smudged with exhaustion, was speaking to a Cathar administrator drone. The boy needs a plasma transfusion, a standard Cell 7 procedure. Our synthesizers are offline. The drone whirred. The procedure requires 1.7 units of billable energy. Has his family's gratitude account been certified? The doctor stared aghast. He's a child. He'll die. The drone's reply was chillingly calm. Then his account will be closed. The invoice, as you so crudely put it, Cathal's voice dripped with disdain, is a standard calculation under the accord. It encompasses resource expenditure risk assessment and the intrinsic value of the lives preserved. It is a formula of pure impartial logic. He gestured with a multi-jointed arm. A kindness for which we ask a simple, structured thank you. Rostova leaned into the microphone. Let us speak of that structure, Lord Arbiter. Let the quorum understand the full measure of your kindness. She nodded to Solon, who was patched into the chamber's display systems. Please display the Cathar demand. All of it. The devil was always in the details. The air above the central dais filled with scrolling text and complex diagrams. Energy costs, material, amortization, interest rates compounded hourly. But then came the other items: a sovereign risk premium, a cultural contamination hazard fee, and the most audacious of all, a potential future accomplishment lien. They had calculated the theoretical future earnings of every man, woman, and child on the Stargazer and taken a percentage. They were taxing ghosts and dreams. Your calculations are exhaustive, Rostova said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the quorum. You have placed a price on everything from the megawatts used in your tractor beam to the potential discoveries of scientists not yet born. Cathal remained unmoved. The accord allows for the full accounting of a rescuer's magnanimity. We have merely been thorough. Our ledgers are precise. They are the foundation of a stable, reciprocal galaxy. He was not defending a policy. He was preaching a gospel. The gospel of the balance sheet. Then let us examine the precision of your ledger, Rostova said, pressing the advantage. Solon, display the energy expenditure for the Cathar tractor beam during the rescue operation. A new set of figures appeared, glowing crimson. Now Rostova continued display the Aurora's energy expenditure during the same period. We were, after all, assisting in the stabilization of the Stargazer's orbit. A second column of figures appeared in cool blue. They were nearly identical. And yet Rostova's voice rang with cold clarity. We have not submitted an invoice. We did not see a commercial opportunity in the face of oblivion. We saw people who needed help. She turned her gaze to the silent witness fleets displayed on the chamber walls. We call that duty. The Cathar, it seems, call it an acquisition. The mirror was now in place. A low hum of discourse echoed from the witness delegations. The Xylosians' light patterns shifted from calm blue to a troubled violet. The Hivani drones began to chatter on restricted channels, their mandibles clicking in agitation. Cathal's crystalline form seemed to darken, absorbing the light in the room. Duty is a primitive concept, the Lord Arbiter retorted, his voice losing its paternalistic edge. It is the precursor to charity, an unstable system that creates dependency. Our method, the method of the ledger, creates strength through obligation. The rescued are elevated by the dignity of their repayment. He believed his own propaganda. The dignity of repayment. Rostova's voice was laced with ice. Tell that to the family billed for their son's life-saving transfusion. Tell that to the 17,000 souls whose air is being metered and charged to their account. Her words were hammer blows against the crystalline certainty of the Cathar. This is not a ledger of gratitude. It is a hostage manifest. A flicker of rage like heat lightning sparked deep within Cathal's form. You twist our customs. You apply your sentimental, chaotic morality to a system of perfect economic justice. His voice rose. The collar of gratitude is a mark of honor, a symbol of a debt honorably undertaken. A collar is a collar, Lord Arbiter, Rostova shot back. And we are not your pets. This was the heart of the matter. We would not be domesticated. The public record was now stained with the Cathar's own admission. They had articulated their philosophy for the entire galactic quorum to hear. The corridor of law gambit had worked. They had walked right into a trap of their own making, lured by the belief that they were simply educating an inferior. Now the second phase of Rostova's plan could begin. Solon, she murmured, her voice a whisper carried only to the fleet mind. Prepare the mirror array, and open a public ledger linked to this chamber's record. Title it, Returned Costs. Affirmative, Commander. The AI's voice chimed in her ear, calm and ready. The mirror is calibrated. The ledger is open. The system was ready to teach them arithmetic. On the bridge of the gilded hand, a Cathar technician shrieked a sound like scraping crystal. Lord Arbiter, we are receiving an energy transfer, massive scale. Cathal, still reeling from Rostova's verbal assault, could not process the report. From where a weapon? No, Lord Arbiter, the technician stammered. It's a refund. Back in the chamber, a new display dominated the central space, eclipsing the Cathar's meticulous invoice. It was a simple, elegant ledger. At the top, a single line item appeared: overcharged energy costs, Cathar invoice 77, alpha. Beneath it, a value blinked, and then a status update: paid in full. Across the void, the TNS Aurora reconfigured its dorsal emitters. Not for weapons fire, but for a focused, high-density energy beam. It was the exact amount of energy the Cathar had claimed to have expended in their rescue operation, drawn from the Aurora's own reactors and fired directly into the Gilded Hand's energy receivers. It was a perfectly balanced equation. A mirror made of light and numbers. What is this mockery? Cathal thundered, his crystalline body vibrating with rage. It is not mockery, Rostova replied, her voice calm and steady, a rock in the storm of his fury. It is a settlement. You claimed a cost, and we have paid it. On the public ledger for all to see, we have zeroed out that portion of your claim. The Xylosian ambassadorial light pulsed a bright approving gold. The Hivani drones fell silent, their collective attention fixed on the proceedings. This was unprecedented. No one had ever tried to pay the Cathar back on their own terms in real time during a public inquest. You cannot simply, Cathal began, but Rostova cut him off. We can, and we have, she stated. Now let us move to the next item on your invoice. The Sovereign Risk Premium. An interesting concept. A fee for the danger you placed yourselves in while performing this rescue. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Solon, please access the public navigational archives for this sector dating back 1 standard month. You cannot invoice for a fire you started. Another window opened on the display. It showed the flight path of the cradle ship Stargazer, a steady, uneventful journey. Then it showed the flight path of the Cathar fleet. They had been shadowing the human vessel for 2 weeks before its drive failure. The navigational data is clear, Rostova announced, her voice resonating with authority. The Cathar fleet was not on a chance intercept course. They were stalking the Stargazer. They were waiting for an opportunity. Torvine, the Xylosian ambassador, shifted his light form. The implication is severe, Commander. Are you suggesting the Cathar had foreknowledge of the drive failure? I am suggesting more than that, Ambassador Rostova said, her eyes locked on Cathal. Solon run a spectral analysis of the Stargazer's drive signature at the moment of failure. Compare it to known gravitic interdiction signatures. The AI worked for a silent, tense moment. Then a new piece of data flashed on the screen, a complex wave pattern with a damningly familiar spike. Signature match found, Solon's synthesized voice announced to the chamber. The drive failure exhibits the characteristic cascade of a forced gravitic shear. The energy profile matches with 99.7% certainty the output of a standard Cathar interdiction vessel. The chamber erupted. The Hivani drones buzzed with agitated clicks. The gaseous philosophers swirled in violent, disturbed eddies. The Cathar had not simply been waiting for an accident. They had caused it. Cathal stood frozen, his crystalline form radiating waves of utter shock. He was a true believer in the system, a high priest of the ledger. The idea that his own people would engage in such crude, direct sabotage was clearly outside the scope of his understanding. He was a predator who had never considered that his species were also pirates. "This is an error," he stammered. "A misinterpretation of the data." "The data does not lie." Lord Arbiter Rostova said, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a grim certainty. "Your fleet created the crisis they are now billing us for. The sovereign risk premium is not just invalid. It is an admission of guilt recorded now on the public ledger of this inquiry." She gestured to the grand display. The line item for the risk premium was now highlighted in red. Beside it, Solon had added a new annotation, "Fraudulent charge, pending investigation for sovereign aggression." The balance of power in the room had not just shifted, it had shattered. The Cathar were no longer benevolent rescuers haggling over a fee. They were aggressors caught red-handed in a conspiracy that preyed on the very laws they claimed to uphold. Their own system was about to devour them. A memory surfaced for Rostova, a lecture at the academy. An old instructor, a veteran of the First Contact Wars, had told them, "True strength isn't in the weapon you wield. It's in forcing your enemy to live by the rules they set for others." That was the principle of the mirror. It wasn't just about returning costs. It was about reflecting character. Lord Arbiter Cathal Rostova's voice was formal, cutting through the rising tide of outrage from the witness fleets. "Given this new evidence, we formally reject the entirety of your claim. Furthermore, we submit a counterclaim to this quorum." She paused, ensuring every eye, every sensor, every mote of conscious light was upon her. "We demand reparations for the damage to the Stargazer, for the endangerment of 17,000 human lives, and for the flagrant and malicious abuse of the very accords this body is sworn to uphold." She pointed not at Cathal, but at the official insignia of the Cathar Imperium displayed beside him. "Your ledger is now open, Lord Arbiter, and we are submitting our invoice." Their sacred law was now a cage of their own design. The Cathar delegation was in disarray. Cathal, for his part, seemed to have shrunk the internal light that defined his form, dimming to a dull, confused gray. He had built his entire worldview on the infallibility of their system, on the righteousness of the balanced sheet. To see it turned against him with such brutal mathematical precision was like watching his scripture burn. His aides, smaller crystalline beings, chittered amongst themselves, their forms flickering with panic. They were sending frantic encrypted messages back to their high command, but the damage was already done. The public ledger was immutable. The witness quorum had seen everything. This is a procedural violation." Cathal finally managed his voice, losing its resonant power, becoming thin and brittle. "A counterclaim requires a separate filing, a new hearing. We are operating under the urgent jeopardy clause of the Accords, Lord Arbiter." Torvin chimed in his light, a firm, unwavering column of judicial blue. "The same clause you invoked to bring this inquiry so swiftly. The lives on the Stargazer remain in peril, held by the same party now accused of instigating that peril. The quorum has a duty to resolve the immediate threat." The Xylosian ambassador was a master of the finer points of galactic law, and he was now weaving a net from Cathal's own legal precedents. The trap had sprung, and its teeth were made of bylaws. A private communication line opened in Rostova's ear. It was Gia, her tactical officer. "Commander, we're seeing movement from the Cathar fleet. 3 of their smaller vessels are breaking formation, heading towards the Stargazer. Their weapons ports are opening." Rostova's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained even. "They're panicking, trying to create a new crisis to invalidate the proceedings." She looked at Cathal, seeing not a diplomat, but a cornered animal. "Solon, display the tactical situation for the quorum. Show them everything." The main screen in the chamber split. One side showed the damning ledger and the fraud accusation. The other now showed a live tactical plot. 3 Cathar destroyers, sharp and menacing, were accelerating towards the helpless human cradle ship. The Aurora was depicted as a lone guardian holding its position between them. Lord Arbiter Cathal Rostova's voice filled the amphitheater, each word a chip of ice. "Is this your next act of benevolence? Will you destroy the evidence of your crime along with 17,000 innocent people? Everyone was watching. They could not hide." The representative of the Hivani drone clusters, a large mantis-like creature projected via hologram, spoke for the first time. Its voice was a series of synthesized clicks and whistles translated into Terran standard by the chamber's systems. "This is unacceptable. The Hivani consensus views the threatening of a disabled vessel during a legal inquest as an act of profound dishonor." A new alert appeared on the tactical display. A dozen Hivani drone ships, previously part of the Witness fleet, were detaching and moving to flank the Aurora. They weren't powering weapons, not yet. They were simply moving a silent, powerful statement. They were no longer just witnesses. They were a posse. Cathal stared at the tactical plot, his crystalline mind finally grasping the full scope of the catastrophe. His legal maneuver had backfired, his military was posturing foolishly, and his allies were abandoning him. He had lost control of the narrative, the law, and the battlefield, all without a single shot being fired. He had been outmaneuvered by a species he considered barely sentient. From a small overlooked corner of the cradle ship Stargazer, a maintenance crew had been working desperately. They had been trying to bypass the Cathar lockout on their communication systems. A young engineer, barely out of her teens, finally found a loophole, a back door in the diagnostic software. "I'm in," she breathed, her fingers flying across a makeshift console. "Broadcasting now. Let's show them who we are." She wasn't trying to hail the Aurora. She was patching into the civilian network, the one the Cathar had been monitoring. Suddenly, the Cathar comms officers on the Gilded Hand were flooded, not with military signals, but with songs. Nursery rhymes from a children's ward. A heartfelt, off-key love ballad being dedicated from an engineer to his wife. A recording of a grandfather telling a story to his grandchildren, his voice warm and full of laughter. It was a deluge of defiant, unapologetic life. It was a weapon they had no defense against. It was the sound of people, not assets. In the inquiry chamber, Solon intercepted the broadcast, and with Rostova's silent nod, played a single clear snippet for the quorum. It was the voice of the little girl from the initial message. "And the stars look like diamonds on black velvet, Grandma Rose. I wish you could see it. We're going to build you a house with a purple sky for a roof." The simple, profound innocence of the child's voice hung in the vast, silent chamber. It was the ultimate rebuttal to the Cathar's ledger of debits and credits. It was the intangible value that their formulas could never quantify. Rostova looked at the broken figure of Lord Arbiter Cathal. She felt a flicker of something on pity but understanding. He was the product of a monstrous system, a man who could no longer distinguish a balance sheet from a soul. "Your tithe is rejected," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "Your authority in this matter is nullified. Power down your weapons, release the stargazer, and prepare to answer our claim. That is the judgment of this quorum, and that is the will of the people you have harmed. She did not need to wait for a vote. She could feel the consensus in the air, a palpable wave of agreement from the assembled species. The mirror had shown them the truth, and the truth was undeniable. Furthermore, Rostova continued pressing the final crushing weight upon him. We invoke the accord of reciprocal justice. For every hour you held the stargazer hostage, your fleet will be held in place by a Hivani and Xylosian security cordon. For every unit of supplies you denied them, an equal value will be tithed from your own reserves to replenish them. She paused. And for the terror you inflicted, you will listen to every personal log, every song, every frightened whisper from that ship. You will learn the true value of a life not from a ledger, but from the source. This was the core of human justice, something Solon had struggled to quantify. It wasn't just about returning costs. It was about enforcing empathy. It was a sentence meant not just to punish, but to teach. The lesson would be delivered, and the tuition was steep. Cathal's form flickered violently, and then with a sound like 1,000 tiny fractures, he went dark. The Lord Arbiter had forcibly severed his connection to the Inquiry, a profound act of legal and personal shame. In his place, a junior Cathar diplomat appeared, its form trembling. We comply, the new diplomat stammered. We will release the vessel. We will stand down. On the tactical display, the 3 Cathar destroyers halted their advance. Their weapon ports slid shut. The tractor beam, holding the stargazer, winked out of existence. A cheer erupted on the Aurora's bridge, a wave of relief and triumph. But Rostova felt only the cold, heavy weight of the next step. This was not over. This was the beginning of a much larger reckoning. She had won the battle of the Inquiry. She had freed the stargazer. But she had also exposed a rot at the heart of a major galactic power. The Cathar Imperium would not take this humiliation lightly. Their system of conquest through contract had been challenged, their methods laid bare for all to see. They would retreat, they would regroup, but they would return. And next time they might not bother with lawyers. Victory itself had become a new kind of danger. The stargazer was free, but its people were traumatized, their trust in the galactic community shattered. A young man sat in the cradle ship's mess hall staring at a blank screen where Cathar propaganda had played on a loop. They owned us, he said to the woman next to him. For 2 days, my life, my future. It was a line item on a bill. How do you ever forget that the cost of this victory was measured in more than just energy and resources? It was measured in the scars left on 17,000 minds. As the Hivani and Xylosian ships formed a loose, watchful perimeter around the Cathar fleet, Ambassador Torvin's light form appeared before Rostova on the Aurora's bridge. You have done the impossible, Commander, he resonated his light, a warm, appreciative gold. You have defeated the Cathar using their own rules. You have established a new precedent. What precedent? Ambassador Rostova asked, watching the wounded stargazer slowly begin to maneuver under its own limited power, turning its nose toward the sanctuary of the Aurora. The precedent of intent, Torvin explained. Until today, the Accords only recognized the outcome of an action. A rescue was a rescue regardless of the rescuer's motives. Now, motivation itself is subject to legal scrutiny. You have taught the galaxy that the why matters as much as the what. He had given a name to her strategy. But Rostova knew it was more than that. We also taught them that ledgers can be audited, she said, and that humanity keeps its receipts. She gave a crisp nod to her communications officer. Open a channel to the stargazer. All hands. Let's welcome them home. The true accounting was just beginning. The channel opened, and the voice of the Stargazer's captain, hesitant and thick with emotion, filled the bridge. "TNS Aurora, we don't know how to thank you." "No thanks are necessary, Captain," Rostova replied, her voice firm but warm. "No tithe is required. Just get your people here safely. We'll handle the rest." She looked out at the starfield, at the silent, brooding Cathar fleet now held in a legal and tactical cage of her design. The public inquiry was won. The hostages were free. But the larger conflict, the one against a philosophy that saw people as property, had just been declared. And Eva Rostova, commander of the Terran naval ship Aurora, was ready to prosecute the case. This fleet, her fleet, this saint ship of humanity, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The universe was about to get a lesson in human morality, and it would be recorded for all to see. The bridge of the TNS Aurora was a strange mix of celebration and tension. Officers exchanged handshakes and exhausted smiles, the immediate relief of freeing the Stargazer, a palpable energy in the air. Yet every eye kept flicking to the tactical display, where the Cathar fleet floated silent and neutered under the watchful gaze of their new alien chaperones. Victory was a fragile thing, a glass sculpture that could be shattered by the next wrong move. The first wave of refugees from the Stargazer was being ferried across, and a raw feed from the shuttle bay played on a secondary screen. A woman, her face streaked with tears, ran into the arms of an Aurora security officer. "You're real," she sobbed, clutching his arm as if he were an anchor in a storm. "They told us no one was coming. They said we had been calculated." Rostova watched the reunion, the raw, unquantifiable human emotion, a stark contrast to the cold arithmetic of the recent conflict. That was the entry they could never make on their ledgers. The cost of despair was immeasurable. "Solon," she said, her voice soft but clear across the bridge, "begin compiling our formal claim for reparations. Every damaged system on the Stargazer, every consumed medical supply, every man-hour of terror. Log it all. We are going to present them with a bill for their education." Commander Solon's avatar materialized near the command rail, its expression as serene as ever. "The Cathar Imperium has responded to the Quorum's judgment. They have dispatched a new envoy to negotiate the terms of the reparations. She is a matriarch executor. Her designation is Zakul." Lieutenant Gia swore under her breath from the tactical station. "A matriarch executor. They aren't diplomats. They're corporate raiders with sovereign immunity. They're the ones the Cathar send when a planetary buyout goes sour." The enemy was not apologizing. They were escalating. "It appears they did not appreciate our critique of their business model," Rostova noted dryly. "When does she arrive? She is already here," Solon replied. "Her vessel just translated from hyperspace. It is significantly larger than the Gilded Hand." On the main view screen, a new ship warped into existence, tearing a hole in space-time that screamed with silent energy. It was a behemoth, a blade of polished black crystal so vast it blotted out the stars. It didn't look like a warship. It looked like a mobile headquarters, a fortress of commerce built to intimidate entire systems. Where the Gilded Hand was a cathedral, this was the bank that owned it. Their new negotiator had arrived. "Hold our position," Rostova commanded, her voice a spike of steel. "Maintain the security cordon with the Hivani and the Xylosians. Let's see what this executor has to say." She had a feeling the debate over invoices was over. A new, more dangerous argument was about to begin. A priority message arrived from Ambassador Torvin. His light form flickered with an uncharacteristic urgency. Commander, a word of caution. Zakul does not operate like Cathal. He was a zealot, a true believer in their system. Zakul is a pragmatist. She does not care about the dignity of repayment. She cares only about the bottom line. She will not be tricked by appeals to morality or honor. He was warning her that the rules had changed again. "Thank you, Ambassador," Rostova replied. "But our position hasn't changed. The debt is theirs, and it will be paid. Be careful she doesn't find a way to make you pay for it." "Commander." Torvin resonated, and then his image faded. The first move from Zakul was not a threat, but an offer. It was broadcast to the entire quorum. She acknowledged the unfortunate misunderstanding and the overzealous actions of her subordinate Cathal. She offered to pay for the full repair of the Stargazer and to provide a generous resettlement package for its 17,000 inhabitants on a Cathar-administered garden world. It was a slick corporate apology designed to smooth things over and make the problem go away. It was an offer of a settlement, not an admission of guilt. Gia snorted. "A garden world administered by them, that's not a resettlement package. That's just a fancier collar." She saw the trap for what it was. "Exactly," Rostova agreed. "They want to close the public ledger, mark this as a one-time anomaly, and go right back to business." She opened a channel to the balance point, addressing the quorum and the newly arrived Cathar envoy. "Matriarch Executor Zakul, your offer is noted. However, this is no longer about one ship. It is about a pattern of behavior. My counterclaim stands, but I am amending it." A hush fell over the diplomatic channels. "I am no longer seeking reparations for just the Stargazer Rostova," announced her voice echoing in the vast chamber of the balance point. "I am demanding a full independent audit of every rescue operation, every gratitude tithe, and every sovereign lien. The Cathar Imperium has levied in the last 500 standard years." The reaction was explosive. The Cathar delegation erupted in furious crackling protest. The Hivani drones buzzed so loudly, it created a wave of static. Even the serene Xylosians pulsed with agitated light. This was more than a legal challenge. It was an existential threat to the entire foundation of Cathar power. It was a declaration of economic war. Zakul's voice when it came was smooth as polished obsidian and just as cold. "Commander Rostova, your request is absurd. It is an unprecedented, baseless intrusion into the sovereign history of our people. The quorum cannot possibly entertain such a radical and destabilizing proposal." She was framing Rostova as a chaotic element, a danger to galactic peace. "It is not baseless," Rostova countered, and she signaled Solon. "The evidence of predatory practices against my people is already on the public record. Who is to say how many other fledgling species, how many other crippled ships have been subjected to the same benevolence?" She turned her attention to the witness fleets. "How many of you have treaties or trade agreements with the Cathar that began with an act of kindness? How many of you are still paying?" A mirror could reflect more than one face. A slow, creeping wave of realization spread through the quorum. Rostova was not just fighting for humanity. She was fighting for every species that had ever been caught in the Cathar's web of contractual servitude. A civilian engineer from the Stargazer, now safely aboard the Aurora, watched the proceedings on a public monitor. He turned to his crewmate. "She's not just trying to get us our money back. She's trying to burn down their whole damn casino." The man had spent 2 days certain he and his family would become property. Now he was witnessing a revolution. The quorum, after a tense period of deliberation, agreed to a preliminary hearing on Rostova's demand for a grand audit. Zakul, cornered by the sudden wave of support for the human position, was forced to accept. She did so with a chilling lack of emotion. Her voice was flat, her demeanor calm. It was the calm of a predator that knows it has more than one way to kill. The battlefield was about to shift from the courtroom to the archives. Solon Rostova said in the privacy of the Aurora's briefing room, "What will it take to conduct an audit of this magnitude? The Cathar historical ledgers are vast." Commander the AI replied, its avatar shimmering before her. They encompass trillions of transactions over centuries. Even with my full processing power, it would take decades to analyze it all. "We don't have decades," Rostova said. "We need a smoking gun, a core principle we can attack. Look for the beginning. Find the first gratitude caller. Find the first time they turned a rescue into a revenue stream. Every system has an origin point." She was looking for the original sin. Zakul, meanwhile, was waging a shadow war. She couldn't stop the audit legally, so she began to attack it politically. She approached the Hivani consensus with a secret offer to forgive their outstanding trade debts. She sent emissaries to the Xylosians, reminding them of a mutual defense pact against a long-dead empire, hinting that human radicalism was a new kind of threat. She was isolating humanity, peeling away their newfound allies with the quiet, persistent pressure of history and self-interest. One by one, the lights of support began to flicker. The first sign of trouble came when the Hivani drone ships pulled back from the security cordon, claiming a need to respond to a piracy threat on their border. It was a flimsy excuse, and everyone knew it. Zakul's political machinations were working. "She's bleeding us," Gia said from the bridge's command center. "Breaking our coalition piece by piece. By the time the audit is approved, we'll be standing alone." "Then we have to work faster," Rostova replied, her jaw set. "Solon, dedicate 90% of your processing power to the archival search. Find me that origin point." The clock was ticking, and it wasn't on their side. Days turned into a week. The Stargazer's crew was integrated into the Aurora's spare habitation decks, their ship a cold, dark husk tethered to the human flagship. The tension was thick enough to choke on. And then Solon found something. Commander I have isolated an anomaly in the Cathar's deep archives. The AI announced, its voice holding a rare trace of what might have been excitement. "It is a ledger, but it is unlike the others. It is far older, and its encryption is of a different order entirely. It is referred in their oldest texts as the first ledger, or more poetically, the world debt." "Can you crack it?" Rostova asked, leaning forward. "The encryption is formidable," Solon admitted. "It seems designed not merely to protect the data, but to erase it if tampered with. However, I have detected a vulnerability. The decryption key appears to be a paradox, a logical contradiction." "Explain," Rostova ordered. "The key requires the simultaneous input of two opposing concepts, a debt that cannot be paid and a gift that must be repaid. It is a philosophical lock, not a mathematical one." The answer wasn't a number. It was an idea. Rostova stared at the screen, her mind racing. A debt that cannot be paid, a gift that must be repaid. It was the story of the Stargazer in miniature. It was the very contradiction at the heart of the Cathar philosophy. "They rescued us, a gift," Rostova murmured, thinking aloud. "And then they presented us with a bill we could never hope to pay a debt. It's the same pattern." She looked at Solon. "Use that. Use the formal record of our case. Use our rejection of their tithe and our own counterclaim for reparations as the input variables. We are the living embodiment of that paradox. We would be the key that unlocked their history." Solon's avatar nodded once. An elegant hypothesis, Commander. I am applying it now. For a long, agonizing minute, the bridge was silent. Then a chime echoed through the speakers, a clear, pure tone. Encryption bypassed, Solon announced. I am accessing the first ledger. What they found was not the record of a cunning predator, but of a desperate victim. The first ledger was not Cathar in origin. It was the record of their own species' rescue billions of years ago. They had been a primitive, spacefaring race on the verge of extinction, their sun going nova, and they had been saved. A godlike race of energy beings known only as the Benefactors had arrived and moved their entire planet to a new stable star system. It was an act of unimaginable power and generosity, but it was not a gift. The Benefactors had presented the ancient Cathar with a bill, a world debt. The cost of moving a planet, of saving a species. The debt was so astronomical, so utterly beyond their capacity to pay, that it became the organizing principle of their entire civilization. For millennia, every Cathar was born into that debt. Every technological advancement, every resource gathered, every ship built, was a payment against an impossible sum. Their entire culture was a prison built by someone else. They aren't predators, Rostova whispered, a profound, chilling understanding dawning on her. They are tax collectors for a ghost. They're inflicting their own trauma on the rest of the galaxy. The gratitude collar was not a tool of conquest. It was a desperate attempt to gather the resources to pay off their own ancient species-defining debt. They were trying to enslave others to buy their own freedom from a long-dead master. The monsters were themselves haunted. Solon Rostova said, her voice heavy with the weight of this revelation. Broadcast this. All of it. To the Quorum, to the Hivani, to Zakul. Broadcast the first ledger. It's time everyone saw the truth. The revelation of the first ledger sent a shockwave through the galactic community. It did not excuse the Cathar's actions, but it cast them in a new tragic light. They were not simply greedy, they were pathologically driven by a multi-generational fear and obligation. Zakul's political maneuvering collapsed overnight. The Hivani A, species with a deep cultural memory of hive slavery, were horrified. The Xylosians pulsed with a light that could only be described as sorrow. Zakul's response was one of absolute, terrifying silence. She did not refute the evidence. She did not attempt to explain it. For 12 straight hours, her black, monolithic ship hung in the void, radiating nothing. The silence was more unnerving than any threat. Gia voiced what everyone on the Aurora's bridge was thinking. What is she doing? She's lost the legal battle, the moral high ground. What's left? A cornered predator is the most dangerous. Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the Cathar vessel. She's not a zealot like Cathal. She won't break. She will lash out. The end game was coming. And then it happened. Solon's voice cut through the tension. Commander, I am detecting a massive data surge originating from the Cathar flagship. It is not a communication. It is an attack. What kind of attack? Gia demanded, her hands flying over the tactical console. Energy weapons, missiles, no. Lieutenant Solon replied, a new urgency in its tone. She is attacking the galactic economy. She is dumping trillions of falsified, worthless debt certificates onto the open market, all backed by the Cathar Imperium's seal. She is trying to trigger a hyperinflationary collapse. She is trying to make the entire concept of debt and credit meaningless. It was an act of pure nihilistic spite. If the Cathar's system of value was to be dismantled, she would dismantle the galaxy's entire system with it. She was going to burn the whole ledger, public and private. It was a murder-suicide on a civilizational scale. Panic erupted across the quorum. Economic indicators on the public channels began to flash red. Ships that ran on credit-based fueling accounts found their access denied. Trade networks ground to a halt. Zakul was weaponizing the very concept of the ledger. "Can we block it?" Rostova demanded. Negative, Commander Solon said. "The data is already propagating through the network. To block it would be to shut down the entire Galactic Information Commons. The cure would be as bad as the disease." Rostova stood in the center of her bridge, the cacophony of a galaxy in financial panic washing over her. She had won the legal fight. She had won the moral argument. And now she was about to watch the entire galaxy burn as a consequence. This was the cost of victory she hadn't anticipated. A win that destroyed everything was not a win at all. But then an idea sparked, born of the paradox that had unlocked the first ledger. A debt that cannot be paid and a gift that must be repaid. The Cathar had a debt to humanity, and humanity could give them a gift. Solon Rostova said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not try to block her data dump. I have a different idea." She looked at the AI's avatar. "Can you calculate the total value of our reparations claim against the Cathar instantly, Commander? It is a significant figure, though trivial compared to the falsified data Zakul is releasing." "Good," Rostova said. "Now calculate the outstanding balance of the Cathar's world debt from the first ledger adjusted for inflation." Solon paused. "Commander, that number is nearly infinite. It is functionally unpayable." "I know," Rostova said, a grim smile touching her lips. "Do it anyway." She turned to her comms officer. "Get me a channel to the entire quorum, and patch me through to Matriarch Executor Zakul. I want her to hear this personally." The final mirror was about to be revealed. The channel opened. Rostova's face appeared on screens across the fleet, across the balance point, and on the bridge of Zakul's Obsidian flagship. "This is Commander Eva Rostova," she began, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. "The Cathar Imperium has attempted to destroy the foundations of galactic commerce. They have done this because their own foundation is built on a lie, an ancient, impossible debt they have inflicted upon themselves and others." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Today, that ends." She nodded to Solon. "On the public ledger, we are filing two final transactions. First, we are taking the full value of the reparations owed to us by the Cathar, and we are using it as the foundational asset for a new non-predatory open-source economic system. A Terran standard ledger backed by our own credit, open to all with no hidden fees and no gratitude collars." A gasp went through the quorum. Humanity was not just demanding payment. It was using that payment to create a rival system, a fair market built from the ashes of the old one. Second, Rostova continued, her eyes finding the camera, as if staring directly at Zakul. "The matter of the Cathar's world debt. The debt that has poisoned your people for millennia." She took a deep breath. "As the aggrieved party in this conflict, and under the accord of reciprocal justice, we claim the right to dispose of your debt as we see fit." She leaned forward. "We are paying it. All of it." A profound galactic silence descended. "We are taking the infinite, unpayable debt of the Cathar, and we are settling it with the one thing you never bothered to ledger: forgiveness." On the public display, a new transaction blinked. A debt value so large it was mostly zeros scrolled across the screen. And beside it, in glowing Terran blue, one word appeared: paid. "Your debt is cancelled," Rostova announced. "The first ledger is closed. You are free." We had not come to punish. We had come to teach. and the lesson was over. On the bridge of the Cathar flagship, matriarch Executor Zakul watched the public ledger. She saw the cascade of her false data being rendered inert, not by a firewall, but by a new system that simply refused to recognize it. She saw the foundation of her entire civilization, the world debt marked as settled. She watched a species she had intended to enslave purchase her people's freedom with a currency she couldn't comprehend. Her ship, once a symbol of implacable power, now felt like a tomb. The cost was immense. Humanity had just underwritten the stability of the entire galactic economy, a burden they would carry for generations. Rostova herself was no longer just a commander. She was a historical figure, her life forever tied to this moment. Her chance for a quiet existence was gone, another casualty of this conflict. But looking at the faces of the Stargazer crew watching the broadcast, their expressions shifting from fear to awe, she knew it was a price worth paying. The institutional consequence was immediate. The quorum voted unanimously to outlaw the practice of gratitude collars and sovereign liens against rescued parties. The precedent of intent became enshrined in galactic law. The Terran Standard Ledger was adopted as the new framework for interstellar trade, its transparency a stark rebuke to the predatory secrecy of the Cathar system. On the bridge of the Aurora, the crisis passed. The alerts faded from the tactical display. The frantic chatter on the comms channels died down, replaced by a quiet, stunned reverence. Rostova walked to the forward viewport, looking out at the starfield. The great black Cathar ship remained silent and still. It was no longer an enemy. It was just lost. The vast mirror arrays atop the Aurora, once used to beam a refund of energy, now pulsed with a gentle, steady light, broadcasting the foundational code of the new open ledger to the waiting galaxy. As the last packet of data was sent, the immense power drain ceased, and the arrays began to cool, their brilliant glow dimming to a soft, peaceful hum. They came to us with a bill for our lives, a debt we were meant to carry forever. They thought the universe was a ledger that everything could be counted, owned, and collared. We showed them a different kind of math. We taught them that the greatest debts are not the ones you owe, but the ones you forgive. And that the freedom of a single soul is a value that can and must outweigh the wealth of any star. They wanted us to learn their system. Instead, we gave them a new one, and in doing so, we set them and ourselves free. The ledger is now balanced.